I woke up Tuesday morning to the sound of heavy machinery grinding away somewhere near my property line, and the pit in my stomach told me this was not going to be a good day. My name is Zachary Iverson, and I have lived in the Meadowbrook Hills subdivision outside Phoenix, Arizona for 3 years now. I bought my house specifically because it sat on the edge of the development, backing up to a small utility easement that gave me some breathing room from the neighbors. What I did not know when I moved in was that the Meadowbrook Hills Homeowners Association was run by a woman named Patricia Crenshaw, and Patricia had made it her personal mission in life to micromanage every single aspect of our community down to the last blade of grass. I pulled on jeans and a shirt, not bothering with breakfast, and headed out my back door. The noise was coming from exactly where I feared it would be. Right there on the easement behind my property, I saw an excavator tearing into the ground, its bucket ripping through soil, and God help me, through the blue PVC piping that I knew ran underneath. My heart started pounding. That was not just any water line. That was the emergency backup supply line that I had installed 2 years ago, the one that connected to the main city water system and ran all the way down to Desert Springs Regional Hospital, about half a mile down the road. "Hey!" I shouted, running toward the excavator. "Stop! You are cutting through a water line!" The operator either did not hear me or did not care. The bucket came down again with a sickening crunch, and I saw water beginning to bubble up from the torn pipe. I waved my arms frantically until the guy finally noticed me and shut off the engine. "What the hell do you think you are doing?" I demanded as he climbed down. Before he could answer, I heard that voice, the voice that had become the soundtrack of my nightmares over the past 3 years. "Mr. Iverson, please step back from the worksite immediately." I turned to see Patricia Crenshaw marching across the grass toward me, clipboard in hand like it was a weapon. She was maybe 50 years old, with that haircut that seemed to be mandatory for HOA board presidents across America, the one that looked like she had asked the stylist to make her look like she wanted to speak to the manager. She wore pressed khaki pants and a polo shirt with the Meadowbrook Hills HOA logo embroidered on it. "Patricia, your crew just destroyed a major water line," I said, trying to keep my voice level. "That line supplies the hospital." "That unauthorized structure on the easement is in violation of HOA Covenant Section 12.7, she replied, not even looking at the gushing water. "No homeowner may install any utilities, structures, or improvements on common area property without written approval from the board. You never submitted the proper paperwork." "I submitted 3 separate applications 2 years ago," I said. "I got approval from the city, from the county, and I sent copies to the HOA. The hospital administrator signed off on it. This is not some garden hose, Patricia. This is an emergency backup system." "We have no record of any such application," she said, consulting her clipboard. "Therefore, the installation is unauthorized and must be removed. The HOA is within its rights to restore the common area to its original condition." The water was really flowing now, creating a small river that ran down the slight slope of the easement. I pulled out my phone and called the hospital. My contact there was a guy named Martin Reeves, the facilities director. We had worked together extensively when setting up the backup line. "Martin, it's Zach Iverson. We have a major problem. The HOA just cut the backup water line." There was a pause. "The emergency line? The one that feeds into our secondary system?" "That is the one. Zach, we are on that backup system right now. The main line has been down for maintenance since 6 this morning. It was not supposed to be back up until 3 this afternoon." My blood went cold. "How long do you have?" "We have storage tanks, but they were only meant to last a few hours. If we do not get water flow restored soon, we are going to have to start shutting down non-essential services. And if it goes on longer than that—" He did not finish the sentence. He did not have to. I looked at Patricia. "The hospital's running on this line right now. Their main is down for maintenance. If we do not get this fixed immediately, people could die." For the first time, I saw a flicker of uncertainty cross her face, but then her jaw set in that stubborn way I had come to know too well. "That is not the HOA's problem. If the hospital wanted to run a line through our property, they should have gone through the proper channels. Now please step back so the crew can finish removing the unauthorized installation." "Are you insane?" I was not shouting yet, but I was getting there. "I am telling you that people's lives are at stake. I am telling you that rules exist for a reason, she shot back. If we let one person break the covenants, then everyone will think they can do whatever they want. This community has standards, Mr. Iverson. I called 911. I was not sure what else to do. When the dispatcher answered, I explained the situation as clearly as I could. She said she would send someone out, but it might take a while because it was not exactly a traditional emergency. I then called a plumber I knew, a guy named Steve Hutchison, who had helped me install the original line. Steve, I need you at my place now. Emergency. The HOA just tore up the hospital line and water's going everywhere. I will be there in 20 minutes, he said without hesitation. I hung up and turned back to Patricia. I have a plumber coming. We need to at least cap this off and stop the water loss until we can figure out a permanent solution. Any repairs to the common area must be approved by the board, Patricia said. We meet the first Tuesday of every month. You can submit a request then. That is today. What time? 7 p.m. The hospital will not last that long. What is wrong with you? Other neighbors were starting to come out now, drawn by the commotion. I recognized Bill Henderson from 3 doors down and Sarah Martinez from across the street. They stood on their lawns, watching the scene unfold. Martin called me back. Zach, I've got our engineering team looking at the situation. We need that line restored in the next 2 hours maximum, or we are going to have to start making some very difficult decisions about patient care. I am working on it, I told him, though I had no idea how I was going to make that happen with Patricia standing there like a khaki-clad brick wall. Steve arrived in 15 minutes, which was some kind of record. He took one look at the torn pipe and the water gushing out and let out a low whistle. Man, they really did a number on it. I can patch this temporarily, but we are going to need to replace this whole section properly. Just stop the water loss, I said. We will worry about the rest later. Steve went to work. He had to shut off the main valve first, which was in a junction box near my property. The water stopped flowing, which solved one problem but created another. Now, nothing was getting to the hospital at all. Patricia was on her phone, and I heard her saying something about calling the police for trespassing. That was rich, considering her crew had just destroyed several $1,000s worth of infrastructure that did not belong to her. A Phoenix PD patrol car pulled up about 10 minutes later. 2 officers got out, looking less than thrilled to be there. The older one, whose nameplate read Kowalski, approached me first. You the one who called this in? I am, I said. I explained the whole situation, showing him the permits I had on my phone, the emails with the hospital, everything. He listened, taking notes, then went to talk to Patricia. She showed him her clipboard and her copy of the HOA covenants. They talked for what felt like forever while Steve worked on the pipe, and my phone kept buzzing with increasingly urgent texts from Martin. Officer Kowalski came back to me. Okay, so this is a civil matter between you and the HOA. We cannot really do anything about that, but given that there is a potential public safety issue with the hospital, I would strongly suggest you all work together to come up with a solution fast. Officer, I am trying. She will not let anyone make repairs without board approval. He went back to Patricia. I could not hear what they said, but I saw her shaking her head firmly. Kowalski looked frustrated. He came back to me one more time. Look, I cannot force her to let you do anything on HOA property, but I'm going to call this into my supervisor and see if we can get someone from the city involved. In the meantime, your guy there should do whatever he can to stabilize the situation. Steve had the pipe capped by then. The water is not leaking anymore, but nothing is flowing either. If you want to restore service, I need to replace this entire section. It is about 20 feet of pipe. I have the materials on my truck, and I could have it done in maybe 90 minutes. I looked at Patricia. Let him work? No, she said simply. Then the hospital goes without water. They should have planned better, she replied. Her face was completely calm, like we were discussing a lawn maintenance issue and not a potential catastrophe. My phone rang. It was not Martin this time. It was a number I did not recognize. I answered. Mr. Iverson, this is Rebecca Nolan. I am the CEO of Desert Springs Regional Hospital. Martin Reeves briefed me on the situation. I need you to understand something. We have 140 patients in this building right now. 12 of them are in intensive care. 7 are in surgery or post-op. Without water, we cannot maintain sterile conditions. We cannot flush toilets. We cannot run cooling systems for our equipment. I need that water line restored immediately." "I understand, Ms. Nolan. I am trying. The HOA president is blocking any repairs." "Put her on the phone." I walked over to Patricia and held out my phone. "The hospital CEO wants to talk to you." Patricia took the phone with obvious reluctance. "This is Patricia Crenshaw." I could not hear what Rebecca Nolan was saying, but I watched Patricia's face go through several interesting expressions. She tried to interrupt a few times, but did not seem to get very far. Finally, she said, "I understand your concerns, but the HOA has rules that must be followed," and handed the phone back to me. Rebecca Nolan was still talking when I put the phone to my ear. "Mr. Iverson, I'm getting our legal team involved. I'm also contacting the city and the county. This is going to get very messy for your HOA if we have to evacuate patients or if anyone suffers because of this." "I will do everything I can," I promised. More vehicles were arriving now. A news van from one of the local stations pulled up, which made sense because someone had probably been monitoring the police scanner. A reporter I recognized from the evening news got out with a cameraman. Patricia saw them, and her expression finally shifted to something that might have been concern. The reporter, whose name was Jennifer Valdez, made a beeline for me. "Sir, can you tell us what is happening here?" I gave her the short version. She took notes, asked a few follow-up questions, then went to talk to Patricia. I saw Patricia shaking her head, holding up a hand to refuse comment. But Jennifer was persistent. My phone rang again. This time it was someone from the Phoenix City Council office, a staff member for Councilwoman Diane Torres. The councilwoman wanted to know what was going on because the hospital CEO had apparently called her directly. I explained everything again. The staffer said someone from the city's water department would be there within the hour. Steve was standing by his truck ready to work but unable to start. "Zach, even if she gives the okay right now, we are looking at close to 2 hours for the full repair. Is the hospital going to make it?" I called Martin back. "Worst case scenario, how long can you last?" "We are rationing everything we can," he said. "Maybe another 90 minutes before we have to start transferring patients, but transfers take time, and some of our patients cannot be moved safely. This is turning into a nightmare." A white SUV with the Desert Springs Regional Hospital logo on the side pulled up. Martin Reeves got out, along with Rebecca Nolan and a man in a suit who I assumed was their lawyer. They walked straight to Patricia. "Ms. Crenshaw, I am Rebecca Nolan. We spoke on the phone. This is our counsel, David Chen. I am here to inform you that if you continue to prevent repairs to that water line, the hospital will hold you and the HOA personally liable for any harm that comes to our patients. We will also be filing for an emergency injunction within the hour." Patricia crossed her arms. "You cannot intimidate me with legal threats. The HOA has every right to enforce its covenants." David Chen spoke up. "Ms. Crenshaw, are you aware that obstructing access to emergency utilities can be considered criminal negligence under Arizona law? If a patient dies because of this, you could be facing manslaughter charges." That got her attention. I saw her eyes widen slightly, but she still did not back down. "No one told us this was an emergency line. Mr. Iverson never properly disclosed what he was installing." "I have the emails," I said, pulling out my phone. I sent 3 detailed applications to the HOA board email address. I got automatic replies confirming receipt. I explained exactly what the line was for and included all the technical specifications. "We never received any such emails," Patricia insisted. "Then someone on your board deleted them," I said, "because I have the receipts right here." A city vehicle arrived, marked with the Phoenix Water Services Department logo. A middle-aged woman in a work uniform got out and introduced herself as Sandra Lopez, a supervisor for the department. She looked at the torn pipe, looked at the permits on my phone, and looked at Patricia. "Madam, this line was properly permitted through the city. It is part of the emergency water infrastructure for the hospital. You had no authorization to tear it up." "It was on HOA property," Patricia said, but her voice was less certain now. "It is on an easement," Sandra corrected. "Easements can be used for utilities with proper permitting. This was properly permitted. You are in violation of city code by damaging critical infrastructure. I am ordering you to allow immediate repairs." "I do not take orders from you," Patricia said. I answer to the HOA board. Then I will have the police arrest you for obstruction, Sandra said calmly. She turned to Officer Kowalski. Can you make that happen? Kowalski looked like he had been waiting for someone to give him a clear directive. Yes, madam. Ms. Crenshaw, you are being ordered by a city official to allow repairs to proceed. If you refuse, I will place you under arrest. It is your choice. Patricia looked around. She was surrounded now by me, Steve, Martin, Rebecca Nolan, David Chen, Sandra Lopez, 2 police officers, a news crew that was filming everything, and a growing crowd of neighbors. Some of the neighbors were whispering to each other, and I caught a few sympathetic looks thrown my way. This is outrageous, Patricia said. I am following the rules. Madam, last warning, Kowalski said. Let them fix the pipe or you are coming with me. Patricia stood there for another long moment. I could see the wheels turning in her head, trying to find some way to maintain control of the situation, but there was no way out for her. She was cornered. Fine, she said finally, but this is under protest. The HOA will be filing a lawsuit. You do that, Sandra Lopez said. In the meantime, get your excavator out of here so the professionals can work. The excavator operator, who had been watching all of this with increasing alarm, did not need to be told twice. He fired up the machine and backed it away from the easement. Steve immediately got to work, and Martin helped him, laying out the new sections of pipe. I jumped in too, holding things in place while Steve made connections. We worked fast, barely talking except to coordinate our movements. Jennifer Valdez and her cameramen were filming everything. She did a stand-up report right there on my lawn, explaining how the HOA had cut off water to the hospital and what the potential consequences could have been. I saw Patricia trying to leave, but Jennifer caught up to her and asked for a comment. Patricia said, "No comment," about 5 times before getting into her car and driving away. The repair took exactly 1 hour and 40 minutes. Steve worked like a man possessed, and Martin proved to be surprisingly handy with a wrench. When we finally got the last connection tightened and Steve gave the okay, I turned the valve back on. We all held our breaths, watching for leaks. The pipe held. Water was flowing again. Martin called back to the hospital. We have water pressure restored, he reported. Looks like we are back in business. He listened for a moment, then gave me a thumbs up. They are confirming flow on their end. We did it. I felt like I could finally breathe again. Steve started packing up his tools. Sandra Lopez took photos and measurements for her report. Rebecca Nolan came over to shake my hand. Thank you, she said. You may have saved lives today. I just wish it had not come to this, I replied. We will be sending the bill for all of this to the HOA, David Chen said, and we will be following up with the city about ensuring this never happens again. As the crowd dispersed, Bill Henderson came over to me. Zach, I had no idea that line was so important. Patricia never mentioned anything about it at the board meetings. You are on the board? Yes, Secretary. I'm pretty much just there to take notes. Patricia runs everything. He looked uncomfortable. Look, I want you to know that not everyone on the board agrees with how she does things, but she is so forceful that it is hard to push back. Maybe it is time to push back, I suggested. He nodded slowly. Maybe it is. The news van left. The city vehicles left. The hospital people left. Steve finished packing up and told me he would email me an invoice. Officer Kowalski gave me a card and said to call if there were any more problems. Finally, it was just me standing in my backyard, looking at the freshly repaired water line and the torn-up earth around it. I went inside and sat down for the first time in hours. My hands were shaking from adrenaline. I made myself a sandwich, but could barely eat it. Instead, I started going through my email, looking for every communication I had ever sent to the HOA about the water line. I found all 3 applications, complete with red receipts. Someone on the board had definitely received them. Whether they had shared them with Patricia or whether Patricia had deleted them herself, I could not say. But the evidence was there. That evening, I showed up at the HOA board meeting. It was held in the clubhouse near the subdivision entrance, a bland room with cheap folding chairs and fluorescent lighting. Patricia sat at a folding table at the front with 4 other board members: Bill Henderson, a woman named Karen Templeton, who was the treasurer, a young guy named Marcus Webb, who was in charge of architectural compliance, and an older man named George Perkins, who served as vice president. The room was packed. Word had spread through the neighborhood, and it seemed like half the subdivision had shown up. Jennifer Valdez and her cameraman were there too, set up in the back corner. Patricia called the meeting to order with her usual brisk efficiency. She started going through standard business, approving minutes from the last meeting, discussing the landscaping budget for the common areas. She did not mention the incident from earlier in the day. When she opened the floor for homeowner comments, my hand went up immediately. So did about a dozen others. Patricia pointed at me reluctantly. "Mr. Iverson, you have 3 minutes." I stood up. "This morning, the HOA ordered the destruction of a water line that supplies Desert Springs Regional Hospital. I properly permitted that line through the city and the county. I submitted 3 separate applications to the HOA board, complete with technical specifications and approval letters from the hospital. Those applications were ignored. When your crew cut the line this morning, the hospital was running on it as their primary water supply because their main line was down for maintenance. You were told this. You were told that patients could die, and you refused to allow repairs until you were threatened with arrest. I want to know what you are going to do to make this right." The room erupted. Multiple people started talking at once. Patricia banged a gavel that seemed to appear out of nowhere. "Order! We will have order!" She waited for the noise to die down. "Mr. Iverson, the HOA had every right to remove an unauthorized installation from common property." "It was not unauthorized," I said. "I have the emails. I have the read receipts. Someone on this board received my applications." Patricia's jaw tightened. "We have no record of any such applications in our files." Bill Henderson cleared his throat. "Actually, Patricia, I went through the files this afternoon after everything happened. I found all 3 of Zach's applications. They were in a folder marked rejected." Patricia turned to glare at him. "We rejected those applications because they were incomplete." "They were not incomplete," Bill said. He was sweating, clearly uncomfortable confronting her, but he pressed on. "They had everything required by our bylaws. They had city permits, county permits, engineering reports, everything. There was no reason to reject them except that you did not want to approve them." "That is not true," Patricia snapped. "Then why did you not tell Mr. Iverson they were rejected?" Bill asked. "Why did you not send him a letter explaining what was missing? That is standard procedure. Instead, you just filed them away and never responded." The room was dead silent now. Everyone was watching Patricia. Karen Templeton spoke up. "Patricia, did you discuss these applications with the rest of the board? I do not remember ever voting on them." "Some decisions do not require a full board vote," Patricia said. "Yes, they do," George Perkins said. He pulled out a copy of the HOA bylaws and started flipping through it. "Any installation on common property requires a majority vote of the board. It says so right here in Section 8. Patricia's face was turning red. "This is ridiculous. We are wasting time on procedural nonsense when we should be discussing important matters." "A hospital nearly lost water today," someone shouted from the audience. "That seems pretty important." More voices joined in. Patricia tried to gavel them down, but the room was not having it. People were angry. They were standing up, pointing fingers, demanding answers. I saw Patricia's composure finally starting to crack. Marcus Webb leaned over and whispered something to George Perkins. George nodded and stood up. "I am calling for a vote of no confidence in Patricia Crenshaw as HOA president. Do I have a second?" "Second," Bill Henderson said immediately. "You cannot do that," Patricia said. "That is not on the agenda." "Actually, any board member can call for a vote of no confidence at any time," George said. "It is in the bylaws you like to quote so much, Section 14. The vote was 4-1. Only Patricia voted for herself. Just like that, she was out as president. George took over as acting president for the remainder of the meeting. "First order of business," George said. "I move that we formally approve Mr. Iverson's waterline installation retroactively and apologize for the damage caused this morning. Second, I move that we reimburse him for all costs associated with the repair." The vote was unanimous, with Patricia abstaining. The meeting went on for another hour. People aired grievances that had apparently been building up for years. Patricia had denied someone's request to install solar panels. She had fined someone for having the wrong color mailbox. She had threatened to foreclose on someone's house over unpaid dues that had actually been paid. The list went on and on. Patricia sat through all of it with her arms crossed, her face like stone. When the meeting finally ended, she gathered her papers and left without a word. I went home feeling exhausted, but vindicated. Steve's invoice arrived the next day, $8,000 for materials and labor. I forwarded it to the HOA, and George confirmed they would pay it. The hospital also sent a formal thank you letter, which George read aloud at the next board meeting. But it was not over, not by a long shot. 2 weeks later, I got a call from David Chen, the hospital's lawyer. "Mr. Iverson, I wanted to give you a heads up. We have filed a lawsuit against the Meadowbrook Hills HOA and Patricia Crenshaw personally. We are seeking damages for the cost of having to implement emergency protocols, for the stress placed on staff and patients, and for the potential risk to patient safety." "How much are we talking about?" $200,000. I whistled. "That is going to hurt." "It should," David said. "What she did was reckless and dangerous. We want to make sure it never happens again, and we want to set a precedent for other HOAs who might think they can interfere with critical infrastructure." The lawsuit made the news again. Jennifer Valdez did a whole segment on it, interviewing me, Martin Reeves, and several medical experts who explained just how serious the situation could have been. The story got picked up by the Phoenix New-Times and even made a few national news blogs. Suddenly, Meadowbrook Hills HOA was infamous. Patricia did not go quietly. She hired her own lawyer and filed a countersuit claiming defamation and emotional distress. She also tried to rally support among some of the homeowners, the ones who agreed with her strict interpretation of the rules. She sent emails claiming that the board had staged a coup, that George and Bill and the others were trying to turn the neighborhood into an anarchic free-for-all where nobody followed any rules. It might have worked, except that more and more stories kept coming out. A family came forward to say that Patricia had tried to fine them for having a wheelchair ramp installed without HOA approval, even though the ramp was medically necessary and exempt under federal law. An elderly man said Patricia had threatened to have his car towed because he parked on the street while unloading groceries. A young couple said Patricia had called the police on their teenage son for skateboarding in the street. The board called a special election to choose a permanent new president. George ran, as did Karen Templeton and 2 other homeowners. George won by a landslide. One of his first acts was to revise the HOA's enforcement policies to be less draconian and more focused on genuine quality of life issues rather than petty rule violations. The lawsuit dragged on for months. Patricia's countersuit was dismissed pretty quickly, but the hospital's case moved forward. Depositions were taken, documents were subpoenaed. I had to testify about the installation of the water line, the permits I had obtained, and my attempts to get HOA approval. Martin testified about the emergency situation at the hospital. Sandra Lopez from the water department testified about the city permits and the importance of the backup line. Patricia's defense was basically that she had been following the rules as she understood them and that she could not have known the water line was critical. But the emails I had sent made that argument fall apart. I had specifically explained in all 3 applications that the line was a backup system for the hospital, that it was a matter of public safety, and that it had been approved by multiple government agencies. There was no way she could claim ignorance. The judge was not sympathetic. In his ruling, he wrote that Patricia had demonstrated a reckless disregard for public safety in favor of a rigid adherence to procedural formalities, and that her actions had placed vulnerable hospital patients at significant risk. He awarded the hospital the full $200,000 plus court costs. The HOA's insurance covered most of it, but there was a significant deductible, and our dues went up to cover the shortfall. A lot of people were angry about that, and Patricia became persona non grata in the neighborhood. I would see her sometimes, driving past my house or walking to her mailbox, and she would stare straight ahead like I did not exist. But the city and county took notice of what had happened. New regulations were passed requiring HOAs to explicitly acknowledge and approve any critical utility installations within a certain time frame. If they failed to respond within 30 days, approval would be deemed automatic. It was not a perfect solution, but it was better than nothing. Desert Springs Regional Hospital sent me a gift basket with a note thanking me again for my quick action. Martin Reeves invited me to a hospital fundraiser where I got to meet some of the staff and see the facility properly. It was humbling to walk through those halls and know that the work I had done and the fight I had fought had helped keep this place running. About 6 months after the incident, I got a knock on my door. It was Patricia. She stood on my front step looking older and more tired than I remembered. For a moment, neither of us said anything. "What do you want?" I asked finally. "I came to apologize," she said. The words seemed to physically pain her. "I was wrong. I should have listened to you. I should have let them fix the pipe right away." I waited. I was not going to make this easy for her. "I spent 20 years working in corporate compliance," she continued, "following rules, making sure everyone else followed rules. When I retired and joined the HOA board, I thought I was doing the same thing, keeping order, maintaining standards. But I took it too far. I stopped seeing the people behind the rules. I stopped thinking about why the rules existed in the first place." "You almost got people killed," I said. "I know," she looked down at her hands. "I've been seeing a therapist, working through some things. I'm not making excuses. I just wanted you to know that I understand what I did was wrong, and I am sorry." I did not know what to say to that. Part of me wanted to slam the door in her face. Part of me felt something that might have been pity. She looked genuinely broken. "Okay," I said finally. "I accept your apology. But that does not mean I forgive you. Not yet. Maybe not ever. You are going to have to live with what you did." She nodded. "I know. Thank you for hearing me out." She turned and walked back to her car. I never spoke to her again after that. She moved out of the neighborhood a few months later. I heard she sold her house and relocated to Tucson to be near her daughter. I did not keep track of her after that. Life in Meadowbrook Hills slowly returned to normal, or at least a new version of normal. George turned out to be a good HOA president, focused more on building community than enforcing minutia. We started having neighborhood barbecues and movie nights. The pool area got renovated. The playground equipment was replaced. People actually started liking each other again, instead of living in fear of fines and violation notices. I became something of a minor celebrity in the neighborhood. People would stop me to talk about the waterline incident, or to thank me for standing up to Patricia, or to ask advice about dealing with the HOA on various matters. It was weird, but also kind of nice. The waterline itself became a point of pride. The hospital put up a small plaque near the junction box thanking the community for supporting critical infrastructure. Martin Reeves organized a tour for interested residents, showing them how the system worked and why it mattered. About 30 people showed up, which was a lot more than I expected. I stayed involved with the HOA, serving on a couple of committees and helping to rewrite some of the more onerous covenant sections. We streamlined the approval process for home improvements, created clearer guidelines for what required board approval and what did not, and established a formal appeals process for people who disagreed with HOA decisions. It was boring work, but it mattered. About a year after the incident, I was replacing some sprinkler heads in my front yard when a car pulled up and a young woman got out. She looked to be in her 30s, professionally dressed. "Are you Zachary Iverson?" she asked. "That is me. My name is Amanda Fletcher. I am a reporter for the Arizona Republic. I am working on a story about HOA overreach and abuse of power. Your situation came up in my research, and I was hoping I could interview you." I was not sure I wanted to relive the whole thing again, but Amanda was persuasive. We sat in my living room for 2 hours while she asked questions and took notes. She wanted to know everything: how I had first discovered the waterline had been cut, how I had dealt with Patricia, what the consequences had been, how things had changed since then. The article came out a few weeks later, a long-form piece that told my story alongside several others from across Arizona. There was a woman in Scottsdale who had been fined $5,000 for having a vegetable garden in her front yard. A man in Tucson who had been threatened with foreclosure over a minor paint color violation. A family in Chandler who had been harassed for months because their child's play structure was supposedly too tall according to HOA rules. The article got a lot of attention. State legislators started talking about HOA reform. Bills were introduced to limit the power of HOAs to fine homeowners, to require more transparency in HOA decision-making, to make it easier for homeowners to challenge unfair rules. I was invited to testify before a state committee, which was surreal. I sat in a government building in Phoenix and told my story to a room full of politicians and staffers and advocates. Some of the proposed reforms passed, others did not. The HOA lobby was powerful, and they pushed back hard against anything they saw as undermining property values or community standards. But progress was made, even if it was incremental. Through all of this, I kept in touch with Martin Reeves at the hospital. We would get lunch every couple of months, and he would update me on how things were going. The hospital had installed additional backup systems after our incident, making sure they would never be caught in that situation again. They had also worked with the city to map all critical water infrastructure and create redundancies wherever possible. "You really did change things," Martin told me once over sandwiches at a deli near the hospital. "Not just for us, but for the whole city. People are thinking more carefully now about utility, reliability, and emergency preparedness." "I just did not want Patricia to get away with it," I said. "Well, she did not. And a lot of people are better off because you stood your ground." I thought about that a lot over the following months. How one moment, one decision to fight back instead of giving in had rippled out in ways I never could have predicted. I had not set out to be some kind of HOA reform activist. I had just wanted to protect something important. But sometimes that is how change happens. Someone has to be willing to say, "No, this is wrong, and I'm not going to accept it." The legal bills from all of this were substantial, even though the hospital had covered most of them. I ended up spending about $15,000 on lawyers and experts. But George and the new HOA board voted to reimburse me from the general fund, arguing that my fight had benefited the entire community. I protested, but they insisted. The vote was unanimous. 2 years after the incident, Desert Springs Regional Hospital held a dedication ceremony for a new emergency operations center. They invited me as a guest of honor, which felt strange but also touching. Rebecca Nolan gave a speech about the importance of community partnerships and emergency preparedness, and she specifically thanked me for my role in ensuring the hospital had reliable backup utilities. Afterward, a woman approached me. She was maybe 60, with gray hair and tired eyes. "Mr. Iverson, I wanted to thank you personally. 2 years ago, my husband was in the ICU at this hospital. He was one of the patients who was here when that water line got cut. The nurses told me later how close they came to having to evacuate him, how dangerous that would have been given his condition. Because of you, they did not have to. He made it through, and he is home now, doing well. So thank you. You saved his life." I did not know what to say. I shook her hand and mumbled something about being glad he was okay. But after she walked away, I had to sit down for a minute. It hit me then. Really hit me. What had been at stake that day. Not abstract policy debates or legal principles, but actual human lives. Actual people who had been vulnerable and depending on that water line to keep flowing. I drove home thinking about Patricia, wondering if she ever thought about that. Wondering if she understood the full weight of what she had almost caused. I hoped she did. I hoped it haunted her. That sounded harsh maybe, but some things should haunt you. Life went on. I kept working my job as a civil engineer, kept living in my house in Meadowbrook Hills, kept serving on HOA committees and boring my neighbors with discussions about drainage systems and water pressure. The easement behind my property was eventually landscaped over, hiding the water line beneath grass and desert plants. You would never know it was there unless someone told you, but I knew. Every time I looked out my back window, I saw that line running underground, carrying water to the hospital, keeping people safe. I saw the fight I had fought and the stand I had taken. I saw the moment I could have backed down, could have let Patricia have her way, could have decided it was not worth the trouble. I was glad I had not backed down. Some fights are worth fighting, even when they are hard, even when the outcome is uncertain, even when people tell you to just let it go. Some things matter too much to ignore. The HOA never bothered me again. George served as president for 3 years before stepping down, and someone equally reasonable took over. The neighborhood thrived. Property values went up, crime stayed low, the parks were maintained. All the things the HOA was supposed to do, they did, without the authoritarian nonsense that Patricia had brought to the job. I heard through the grapevine that Patricia had eventually settled into her new life in Tucson. Someone said she was volunteering at a library, helping people with literacy programs. I did not know if that was true, but I hoped it was. I hoped she had found a way to channel her energy into something constructive, something that helped people instead of hurting them. As for me, I became something of a go-to person for HOA disputes in the area. People would reach out asking for advice, asking how to fight back against overreaching boards, asking what their rights were. I helped where I could, sharing what I had learned, pointing people toward resources and lawyers and advocacy groups. It was not something I had planned, but it felt right. The water line itself got an upgrade about 3 years after the incident. The hospital, working with the city, decided to replace the aging infrastructure with newer, more robust piping. They did it properly this time, with clear signage, protective barriers, and coordination with every entity that had any stake in the system. I consulted on the project, making sure the new line would be even more reliable than the old one. When the upgrade was complete, Martin invited me to tour the hospital's mechanical systems and see how everything worked together. It was fascinating, in a nerdy engineer kind of way. Miles of pipes and valves and pumps, all working in harmony to keep the hospital running. The backup line I had installed, now upgraded, was just one small part of a vast network. But it was a crucial part, the thing that could mean the difference between smooth operation and catastrophic failure. "You know what the scary thing is?" Martin said as we stood in the basement mechanical room, surrounded by humming equipment. "Most people never think about this stuff until it breaks. They turn on a faucet and expect water. They flip a switch and expect lights. They never consider how many things have to work correctly to make that happen." "That is true," I agreed. "And there are a lot of Patricias out there who would rather enforce petty rules than understand why infrastructure matters." "At least our Patricia learned her lesson," Martin said. "Eventually." I thought about that. Had she learned? I wanted to believe so. I wanted to believe that people could change, that even someone as stubborn and blind as Patricia Crenshaw could see the error of her ways and become better. Maybe she had. Maybe she was down in Tucson, teaching someone to read, and thinking about the day she almost cost lives because she could not see past her clipboard. Or maybe she was still convinced she had been right, that everyone else had overreacted, that the rules mattered more than anything. I would never know for sure. What I did know was that the water flowed, the hospital functioned, and the neighborhood was better off without her in charge. That was enough. Years passed. The incident became part of neighborhood lore, the story people told at parties when explaining the history of Meadowbrook Hills. Did you hear about the time the HOA cut the water line to the hospital? New residents would listen with wide eyes, hardly believing it had really happened. I'd gray a bit around the temples. I refinished my deck. I planted some trees. I lived my life. And every day, water flowed through that buried pipe behind my house, invisible but essential, a reminder that sometimes the most important things are the ones we cannot see, and that standing up for what is right matters more than keeping the peace. The HOA continued to function, evolved to become more responsive and less autocratic. We were not perfect. There were still disputes, still people who thought their neighbors' paint choices were offensive, still arguments about parking and noise and pets. But we handled it better, with more grace and less vindictiveness. I never regretted installing that water line. I never regretted fighting Patricia. I never regretted standing in my backyard on that Tuesday morning and refusing to let her have her way. Because some things are bigger than HOA covenants and property values and neighborhood aesthetics. Some things are about life and death. And when you know that, really understand it, you do not back down. You cannot. You stand your ground, you fight the fight, and you trust that doing the right thing will matter in the end. It did matter. It still matters. And every time I drive past Desert Springs Regional Hospital on my way to work, I think about that water line running underground, connecting my property to theirs, connecting all of us in ways we rarely acknowledge but depend on every day. That is the story of how the HOA cut my emergency water line, not knowing it supplied the hospital down the road. It is a story about rules and common sense, about bureaucracy and humanity, about one woman's refusal to see reason and a community's decision to choose better leadership. But mostly, it is a story about infrastructure, invisible and underappreciated, and the people who fight to protect it. Because in the end, that is what keeps us all alive. The water flowing through pipes, the electricity running through wires, the systems we build and maintain and defend against those who would damage them, intentionally or otherwise. Patricia Crenshaw cut my water line, but she did not cut my resolve. And in the end, that made all the difference.